эту систему. Сейчас ставят там ракеты. Так? Но вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Значит, туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров. Но мы знаем, технологии развиваются. Мы примерно знаем, в каком году примерно американцы получат новую ракету, которая будет уже не 500 километров, а 1000, а потом больше. И с этого момента они начнут угрожать нашему ядерному потенциалу. Мы по годам знаем, что будет происходить. И они знают, что мы знаем. Это вам только вешают лапшу на уши, как у нас говорят. А вы, в свою очередь, вешаете своему населению. И люди не чувствуют опасности. Вот меня что беспокоит. Ну как мы не можем понять? Мы тащим мир вообще в совершенно новое измерение. Вот в чем проблема. Делают вид, что как будто ничего не происходит.
You differ with the current administration, with the Obama administration now, and having said you support a no-fly zone in Syria. If say you're president, and that no-fly zone is in effect, and a Russian jet flies into that no-fly zone, and they refuse warnings to leave, do you give the order to shoot down a Russian jet?
Well, that's a hypothetical that I think there are many steps you have to go through and decisions you have to make before you ever get to that. And the Russians would be certainly warned. There's been military discussions now to, as they say, deconflict airspace. So I think it would be highly unlikely if this were done in the right way.
But ultimately, a no-fly zone is an anti-aircraft proposition.
It is. It is.
You have talked about, and in the last debate and again today, that you would impose a no-fly zone to try to protect the people of Aleppo and to stop the killing there. President Obama has refused to do that because he fears it's going to draw us closer or deeper into the conflict. And General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says, you impose a no-fly zone, chances are you're going to get into a war, his words, with Syria and Russia. So the question I have is, if you impose a no-fly zone, first of all, how do you respond to their concerns? Secondly, if you impose a no-fly zone and a Russian plane violates that, does President Clinton shoot that plane down?
Well, Chris, first of all, I think a no-fly zone could save lives and could hasten the end of the conflict. I am well aware of the really legitimate concerns that you have expressed from both the president and the general. This would not be done just on the first day. This would take a lot of negotiation. It would also take making it clear to the Russians and the Syrians that our purpose here was to provide safe zones on the ground. We've had millions of people leave Syria, and those millions of people inside Syria who've been dislocated. So I think we could strike a deal and make it very clear to the Russians and the Syrians that this was something that we believe was in the best interests of the people on the ground in Syria. It would help us with our fight against ISIS.
I know you keep referring to Barack Obama all night here, but you in Syria talked about a no-fly zone, which the president certainly does not support, nor do I support, because A, it will cost an enormous sums of money. Second of all, it runs the risk of getting us sucked into perpetual warfare in that region. Thirdly, when we talk about Syria right now, no debate, like Gaddafi, like Saddam Hussein, Assad is another brutal, murdering dictator. But right now, our fight is to destroy ISIS first and to get rid of Assad second.
Well, I think Senator Sanders has just reinforced my point. Yes, when I was Secretary of State, I did urge, along with the Department of Defense and the CIA, that we seek out, vet, and train and arm Syrian opposition figures so that they could defend themselves against Assad. The president said no. Now, that's how it works. People who work for the president make recommendations, and then the president makes the decision. So I think it's only fair to look at where we are in Syria today. And yes, I do still support a no-fly zone.
With you, your question, Steve.
Yes, so, Steve, it's really important to look at where we're going.
It's not just a moment in time, but where has this strategy of voting for the lesser evil taken us? All the reasons you were told to vote for the lesser evil over the last 10 or 12 years, because you didn't want the expanding wars, you didn't want the meltdown of the climate, you didn't want the offshoring of our jobs, or the attack on immigrants, or the massive bailouts for Wall Street. That's actually what we've gotten, by the droves, because we as public interest allowed ourselves to be silent and voted for the lesser evil. But the lesser evil doesn't solve the problem. The Obama administration, even with 2 houses of Congress, actually did all of these things that were, as bad as George Bush in the case of climate, blew the roof off of fossil fuel emissions. Yeah, all of the above gave us some renewable energy, but it completely amplified and intensified fossil fuel production, which has been incredibly destructive to the climate. The wars have gotten bigger. We're now bombing 7 countries. It's really important to look at not just the rhetoric here, but actually look at the track record. And the reality is the lesser evil and the greater evil is a race to the bottom. And even Donald Trump and the right-wing extremism grows out of the policies of the Clintons, in particular NAFTA, which sent our jobs overseas, and Wall Street deregulation, which blew 9 million jobs up into smoke. So that's what's creating this right-wing extremism. A vote for Hillary Clinton isn't going to fix it. And one last point, which is this, that it's now Hillary Clinton who wants to start an air war with Russia over Syria by calling for a no-fly zone. We have 2,000 nuclear missiles on hair-trigger alert, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the former premier of the Soviet Union, is saying we are closer to a nuclear war than we have ever been. Under Hillary Clinton, we could slide into nuclear war very quickly from her declared policy in Syria. So I won't sleep well at night if Donald Trump is elected, but I sure won't sleep well at night if Hillary Clinton is elected. Fortunately, we have another choice other than these 2 candidates who are both promoting lethal policies. But on the issue of war and nuclear weapons and the potential for nuclear war, it's actually Hillary's policies, which are much scarier than Donald Trump, who does not want to go to war with Russia. He wants to seek modes of working together.
What about the option of controlling the airspace so that barrel bombs cannot be dropped?
All the options.
What do you think of that option, sir?
Right now, Senator, for us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia. That's a pretty fundamental decision that certainly I'm not going to make.
We're back with Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. She's a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees, as well as an Iraq War veteran. Congresswoman, you're opposed to a no-fly zone that the U.S. would impose over Syria, even though many of the Republican presidential candidates, you heard it at the debate this week, they think it's a good idea. Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, the Democratic presidential candidate, she thinks it's a good idea. Doesn't include ground troops. Why do you think it's a bad idea?
Well, first of all, this is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly that we need to end this war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad now. If this war is allowed to continue on until the next after the presidential election, when we have a new president here, as you said, whether it's Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, or some of the other candidates who are running for president, they're all advocating for a no-fly zone, which would directly start a Russia-U.S. war, which could then easily escalate into a World War III or nuclear-type situation.
Will a Hillary Clinton no-fly zone in Syria start World War III? Putin has warned that he will act if the United States does not step down in Syria. Syria and Bashar al-Assad are strategic allies of both Russia and China, and America is playing with fire. The risks of nuclear war are currently the highest they've ever been in recorded history, and to ignore these risks could prove fatal. Some believe, for example, that mutually assured destruction will deter superpowers like the United States or Russia from engaging in nuclear war. But is this enough of a deterrent? What if the strike is strategic and limited in scope? Many believe that a preemptive nuclear strike would gravely injure the Russian bear and vice versa. Who will act first? Will the U.S. strike to reset the global economy and secure the petrodollar? Will Russia counter-strike? The decimation of human life would actually benefit the world's elite. They would profit from it immensely, and it would move the population through fear. Is this how a failing U.S. empire will succeed against a rising East? The Ministry of Propaganda is brainwashing you into believing that a Hillary Clinton presidency is the lesser of two evils, and to elect Donald Trump would be to elect a misogynistic, sexist, racist, xenophobic, and put him next to the nuclear codes. But who's more dangerous in reality? Trump or Hillary? Hillary wants a no-fly zone in Syria. Trump diplomacy. The powers that be maintain the power through the control and malleability of a population's mind. They must manage the herd cull from time to time. You've heard the expression, you can lead a horse to water. They use fear, misdirection, and the repeating of myths and half-truths over and over again. They beat it into your head. Repeat something long enough, loud enough, and frequently enough, and eventually you'll believe it. ISIS is a threat. Russia is a threat. Trump is a threat. On and on and on. We are at the tipping point of a major global event, and World War III is on the horizon. If you don't believe me, just open your eyes. Take a moment, turn off the TV, your computer, put down your cell phone, and close your eyes. Wake up. It's just around the corner, and as many have warned, it could happen well before the U.S. election on November 8th. October 11th. Vladimir Putin ordered all Russian state officials and government workers to bring back their children studying abroad immediately, even if it means cutting their education short and not waiting until the end of the school year. He also ordered that if the parents of these same officials live abroad and have not lost the Russian citizenship, they should also return home immediately to the motherland. This is very disturbing, and the message is clear. On October 25th, the Wall Street Journal reported Putin preparing nuclear survival drills for the entire Russian population. Video shows bomb shelters being upgraded, gas masks being tested, and emergency workers in protective yellow suits preparing for the worst. What do they know that you don't? And why would 40 million people be preparing for an outlier event? Is it a stunt? Psychological warfare in the new Cold War is something far more serious. Russia also just unveiled its most powerful nuclear missile in its arsenal, the Satan II, that could destroy the entire East Coast with just one hit, or wipe out the entire state of Texas or England in a blink. Why such a full display of force? In the dark corners of the Kremlin, Putin and the oligarchs are watching the U.S. election very closely. They know a Hillary Clinton win will almost assuredly collapse diplomatic relations, as the American people debate the lesser of two evils and vitriol rages in the streets over Hillary and Trump. Putin is deploying warships to Syria, his largest naval deployment since the Cold War. Intelligence indicates he is preparing for a major assault on ISIS in Aleppo to secure his neighbor Assad. On October 21st, a flotilla of 8 Russian warships were spotted off the British coast, sailing down the English Channel from north and south, putting the Royal Navy on red alert and alarming its neighbors. Is Putin preparing for one last showdown? Remember, the last time NATO declared a no-fly zone, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was murdered and ISIS was born. The Greater Levant collapsed and a vacuum so violent and deadly rose that Islamic extremists took over and began cutting people's heads off. Since the toppling of Gaddafi and the rise of ISIS, hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians have died. According to some third-party estimates, over 500,000 people are now dead in Syria. Civilians. Men, women and children. The U.S. government, Pentagon and Obama have now all but admitted that they created ISIS. They admit to funding and arming the moderate terrorists on the ground. But why? Is ISIS a tool? Is Washington arming the equivalent of gangs on the streets of LA to carry out the dirty work for the powers that be? Toppling leaders, overthrowing governments, to add more fuel to the fire. On September 17th, U.S. jets bombed and killed at least 62 Syrian soldiers, allowing ISIS to take a key military location. Why is the U.S. providing air cover for ISIS? Putin realizes that Syria is a red line, Assad on the chopping block, and the last line in the sand before a total loss of control in the region. If the US is successful, they will install puppet governments like they've done in Iraq and Ukraine. Putin must stop the US at all costs, even if it means sacrificing the lives of his own people. You see, a loss of control of Syria, a strategic Russian ally, means he could lose power. It would also mean the oligarchs might turn on him. NATO's positioning of a missile defense shield in Eastern Europe, in countries like Romania and Poland, has only heightened concerns in Moscow. Established under the guise of defending itself from Iran, who has no feasible nuclear capability at this point, has proven both countries gutless to Western interests. The missile defense shield is now ground zero in the new Cold War, and it positions the West for a preemptive attack. Will Putin allow NATO to continue to gravely diminish Russia's nuclear response capabilities and threaten its national defense? Would you? What if Putin built a missile defense shield in Canada or Mexico to protect against a potential strike from Hawaii? Would the US sit idly by, in dark corners of Washington, D.C., and the smoking rooms of the world's elite? Many believe they are planning for a massive war, a decisive, limited and strategic nuclear event, a reset. Put yourself in the shoes. America is unstable, its economy held up by 0% interest rates and bailouts. The people are getting angrier, a populist uprising inevitable, and economic collapse coming. So what will they do next? How can they pull America into a third world war without looking like the bad guy? More importantly, how can they justify it in the eye of public opinion? Just like weapons of mass destruction and the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, they will base it all on a lie. And the people will buy it hook, line and sinker. What I'm about to tell you is the most frightening provocation yet. At this very moment, behind closed doors, the powers that be are orchestrating a vast covert plot through the United Nations to convict Vladimir Putin of war crimes in Syria. This is a deception, a demonization campaign, and a total untruth based on lies. They will blame Putin for civilian deaths in Syria, the rise of ISIS, and use it as the basis for the nuclear war. This is how they sway public opinion for an attack. He's the new Hitler. The mainstream media will comply, propel this narrative to every American, so every barring sheep will accept what's coming. Russia and China are buying record amounts of gold, selling U.S. treasuries and divesting completely from the petrodollar. This is an act of war. The IMF has recently included the Chinese yuan as part of the special drawing rights of world reserve currency. Economic war is a precursor to the real thing, and in response, the U.S. has engineered a collapse in the oil markets with the partners in OPEC. Imposed sanctions on Russia, collapsed the ruble, and pressured Putin to begin privatizing Russian assets to hopefully seize control. Russia and China's divestiture from the petrodollar shifts the balance of power for international financial markets. An illusion the powers that be have been pulling off for far too long. Smoke and mirrors. A rabbit out of the hat. The US dollar backed by nothing but blood and war. The establishment of the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, by the BRICS nations is threatening Western-controlled financial markets and institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. Without the petrodollar and the military-industrial complex that protects it, the U.S. empire will collapse. Now that we have motive, and now that we know how a third world war will be positioned, who will strike first? Will there be another Gulf of Tonkin or Franz Ferdinand? Could it be an accident? The U.S. government must be exposed for its lies, its corruption, its monopoly of power. The establishment elite are pulling the strings of Hillary Clinton, and she must be stopped. Why? Because they want war. The banks support her. The media supports her. The technology giants support her. Everybody supports her. If we do not act now, expose the Washington elite for their lies, educate our friends and family to the truth behind the events unfolding around the world. Our entire fate and that of our loved ones could be jeopardized. We must understand that our neighbor is not our enemy. Black lives don't matter. All lives do. Syria is not the enemy. Washington is. Wall Street is. Silicon Valley is. The political elite are out of control. The cesspool that makes up DC today has been allowed to rot and fester unchecked for far too long. Our founding fathers roll over in the graves. Crimes go unpunished, bailouts continue, and our wealth transferred and stolen. They send our children to wars of which they refuse to fight on the front line themselves. This is a monopoly of power and must be stopped. Hillary must be stopped. The time to turn the tide is now. Get out and vote Trump on November 8th. He's not perfect and he might not stop the inevitable. But he's our best shot. Swing the pendulum back. Stop the radical left. Protect the Constitution and for God's sake pray.
Мы знаем, технологии развиваются. Мы примерно знаем, в каком году примерно американцы получат новую ракету, которая будет уже не 500 километров, а 1000, а потом больше. И с этого момента они начнут угрожать нашему ядерному потенциалу. Мы по годам знаем, что будет происходить. И они знают, что мы знаем. Это вам только вешают лапшу на уши, как у нас говорят. А вы, в свою очередь, вешаете своему населению. И люди не чувствуют опасности. Вот меня что беспокоит. Ну как мы не можем понять? Мы тащим мир вообще в совершенно новое измерение. Вот в чем проблема.
A no-fly zone is an anti-aircraft proposition.
It is.
You have talked about, and in the last debate and again today, that you would impose a no-fly zone to try to protect the people of Aleppo and to stop the killing there. President Obama has refused to do that because he fears it's going to draw us closer or deeper into the conflict. And General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says, you impose a no-fly zone, chances are you're going to get into a war, his words, with Syria and Russia. So the question I have is, if you impose a no-fly zone, first of all, how do you respond to their concerns? Secondly, if you...
Делают вид, что как будто ничего не происходит.
You differ with the current administration, with the Obama administration now, and having said you support a no-fly zone in Syria. If say you're president and that no-fly zone is in effect, and a Russian jet flies into that no-fly zone and they refuse warnings to leave, do you give the order to shoot down a Russian jet?
Well, that's a hypothetical that I think there are many steps you have to go through and decisions you have to make before you ever get to that. And the Russians would be certainly warned. There's been military discussions now to, as they say, deconflict airspace. So I think it would be highly unlikely if this were done in the right way.
But ultimately,
эту систему. Сейчас ставят там ракеты. Так? Но вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Значит, туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров. Но